I'm joined by Harry Littman of the Talking Feds YouTube channel. Harry, big news in Arizona when it comes to Donald Trump's legal troubles and also the legal troubles of Donald Trump's inner circle. You and I previously reported about how Donald Trump's lawyer, Jenna Ellis, entered into a cooperation agreement. She became a state's witness against false electors, potentially against Donald Trump, revealing everything that she's aware of and giving kind of carte blanche access to herself and her testimony. So that was big. Now the dominoes are starting to fall there as well. A fake elector pleading guilty, the first time we've seen that happen in the nation. If you're Mark Meadows, if you're any of the other people in Trump's inner circle who probably aren't in his inner circle anymore, you are in big trouble. You have zero immunity, after what this Supreme Court did. You're left to dry, hang out to dry while Trump has whatever immunity the Supreme Court provided. But also, Arizona may be doing this surgically, and the attorney general there may be handling this case surgically, whereas in Fulton County, it was kind of everybody, all in once. And you saw when you put everybody together, when people who have access to good lawyers in the area, the chaos they can create to derail a case. But where you're a little more surgical in Arizona, the way maybe I describe it, somewhere between as surgical as Special Counsel Jack Smith on one end of the spectrum, and on the other end, Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis really not being surgical at all. You're kind of in the middle, but closer to the surgical end of that spectrum. It's an interesting approach, but we could be talking about in 2025 Trump indictments and convictions for Meadows and others. What's your take? And I know you wrote an op-ed about this recently.
Yeah. So first, you're really right, and Fani Willis decided to go RICO, which is another way of saying the kitchen sink, and the kitchen sink times, what was it, 23? So even leaving aside shall we call it a peccadillo, that case was gonna be lumbering and really labyrinthine. What we're talking about in Arizona is relatively clean. It's the false electors. That's got sort of three different parts to it. They tried to push on the legislature. Rudy Giuliani came out there and held a press conference, but the legislature didn't bite. Then they tried, there are 11 people in the indictment who all said, I am a duly elected elector for Donald Trump, etc. So just false. 11 of them did that. And then they also tried to push on Mike Pence. So there are 4 states that are doing something like this. They were all a little bit late, but in each of them, as you say, we've got the state guys and we've got the feds. On the state guys, those are people. So one has now pleaded, and you're right. It's the first time in the country any false elector has pleaded, and it makes sense for them to plead. They were already doing that in Georgia, although they were getting immunity. These are guys, they're not like casting their lots for life with Donald Trump. They have a life in Arizona they want to pursue. They don't want to go to jail. The prosecutor is going to give them a good deal. This first woman, Pellegrino, got 1 misdemeanor. It's a 9 felony count. So the basic dynamic that prosecutors try to establish of, here you go, first in gets the better deal, etc. I think that pressure is now on these state guys. But now let's go over, as you say, Giuliani, Boris Epstein, John Eastman, those federal guys. Oh, and of course, Mark Meadows. Jenna Ellis, remember, is not sort of a low level. It's not like, say, Carlos de Oliveira in Mar-a-Lago. She is right in the center of all this stuff. So she has all the goods. And you're right, she could kind of turn out to be a bad witness, but she's gotten a great deal where she gets a complete walk. And she already was crosswise, right? She was asking Trump to pay her fees and he wouldn't do it. So she was left out in the cold, a dangerous place to leave someone with all that information. Now, as to Trump himself, something really weird happened yesterday, Ben. We found out that the grand jurors really wanted to indict him. I mean, they were pushing hard. to indict him. He winds up as unindicted co-conspirator number 1, and he's all over the indictment. But the reason that happened is the Arizona prosecutor told them, there was a whole PowerPoint and long discussion about the Pettit policy of the DOJ, which I had the lead on when I was there. It's about after a state has had a trial, do you have a second trial? The Constitution permits the federal government to have a second trial because it's a separate sovereign, but kind of smells bad, right? Sort of smells like double jeopardy. So the Pettit policy says you can do it only if that previous trial left things demonstrably unvindicated. Think Rodney King and that state trial, he's acquitted, and the Fed interest demonstrably unvindicated, so you do it a second time. It says exactly nothing about whether a state in the first instance would bring an indictment. So it's really funky because in another very close world to ours, he would have been indicted. Still and all, let's focus in for a second on Giuliani and Eastman and Epstein, and especially Mark Meadows, who knows everything more than anyone, and so far, with some adroit lawyering and some good luck rubbing off them from Trump, have really stayed pretty clean and out of trouble. But here, Trump can't help them. It's a state prosecution. You know, they are looking at several years in state penitentiary. They have only one way to help themselves, and that's with information about unindicted co-conspirator number 1. I'm not saying it will happen, but we know already that the grand jury wanted to do it, and this is the way cases against really big actors are built. And if we're in a setting where Trump's president, I don't see it. I think the Supreme Court would say you can't go after him for now. But if he loses, what happens to a Mark Meadows? What happens to a Boris Epstein? And it's a reminder that these cases, man, they are alive and moving forward. And this election race, which is going a lot worse for Trump all of a sudden, is really all about his liberty.
So, Harry, take us into that grand jury deliberation. I know you're not physically there, but based on all the reporting and all of the data points that you have. So the prosecutors make this presentation where they lay out all of the crimes that were taking place, and all of these co-conspirators are being mentioned, and many of them get indicted. The grand jury's like, I understand we're like indicting all the people who like gave the murderer the weapon, but like, are we going to do the murderer? Because we see a murder happening right here. So,
we see a head honcho here, right?
So what do you want us to do? So why, when the grand jury sees this evidence, and a grand jury that's empowered, it's not the prosecutor who indicts, they present to the grand jury is the one who makes the vote and ultimately votes to indict or not indict. Why, when they were like, we want to indict Trump, does that not happen? What does that have to do with the Pettit policy? Can you explain that a little bit more?
Well, I can explain what they thought. First, it's really interesting. We wouldn't normally hear this stuff. This is in response to a motion from the defense saying it's all political and selective prosecution. And it's the attorney general that pushed that forward to say, hey, I was telling them don't even indict Trump. It was by no means political, but that's why we even learn about it. You are right. The prosecutor said again, this is your call, not mine. But they were obviously very eager to indict Trump. He said to the prosecutor, I know you're going to be very disappointed about this, and it's your call, but let me tell you about the Department of Justice Pettit policy. And it's not in what they revealed in the transcript, but there's literally, we know, a PowerPoint that they go through and a long discussion. That's as far as I can take you to the point. Why? Because the prosecutor, presumably innocently, it was just a complete whiff. The Pettit policy is something that the DOJ will use to decide once there's been a state prosecution, will they do a second one? Sometimes they will, even if there's been a conviction, just because there's a federal interest that really hasn't been satisfied. But as for the decision, whether the state in the first instance brings a case, it just couldn't be, more of a non sequitur. So that's, I assumed somehow the prosecutor thought it was right or a good idea or whatever. Yeah. And the prosecutor was careful to say, it's your call, but he also really dissuaded them. He recommended against it. And we're finding that out now because they're trying to show the judge, see, we weren't going after him. So it's kind of bizarre. And I think it's a little late to try to unscramble the eggs. You have people pleading guilty. You have Jenna Ellis ready to go to trial against the other 9. On the other hand, you have a grand jury and an attorney general, presumably, who presents a witness that leads to this conclusion, as you said. What about the head honcho here who did the whole thing? Shouldn't he be indicted as well? And he certainly can be indicted down the line. As with everything else we're talking about, we've been focused November. Different ball game now. What we really want to think about is summer of 25, and then the risks for Donald Trump could be really extreme.
Harry, I love that just things are falling down. We've got screens coming in everywhere. So let me get.
I'm so excited.
Tell me if you think this theory, though, potentially makes sense, that in Arizona, the prosecutors saw what was happening in Georgia. They realized that Donald Trump's fine throwing all of his co-conspirators under the bus, that they had an easy path to prosecution of some of these other individuals, sans Donald Trump. Take Trump out. Trump doesn't give a crap. He's not going to fund any of these other people. They find out that this grand jury wants to indict Donald Trump. They huddle up and they go, all right, let's talk about this Pettit policy and let's stretch it to mean something that it really doesn't. And we could at least give them a PowerPoint to divert their attention away from Donald Trump. So the grand jury feels sufficiently satisfied that they've done their job. We've given them an out and that we don't have to indict Donald Trump yet. Our own Pettit policy is Jack Smith's doing that. We at Arizona just want these convictions and we'll deal with that. It's a possible theory.
It is, but I'm a former prosecutor and I got to get off the train at that point where they say, let's take the Pettit policy and stretch it. I think maybe they were eager to find a reason and somehow they got talked themselves into the notion that it was real, but for a prosecutor to mislead a grand jury, even on behalf of such strategy, that's some bad stuff. And I would never lightly accuse a prosecutor of that. But the basic notion of, we got enough here without going after like Ron DeRones himself. Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Well, it makes sense to you. It makes sense to me. No. What really makes sense to me is everything you're putting out on the Talking Feds YouTube channel, on your way to 500,000 subscribers. Last month, your biggest subscriber growth. Let's keep up the momentum, folks. Go check out the Talking Feds YouTube channel. I promise you it's one of the best channels on YouTube. Check it out. Hit subscribe here as well. Harry, thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Ben. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.